Okay, in this lecture, we are going to explore the psychology of attitudes and persuasion in consumer psychology. Attitudes are evaluative judgments, which have two major components, right? Evaluative judgments, so they have a direction, could be positive, negative, or neutral. They have a strength, and that could be anywhere from weak to moderate to strong. Strong attitudes are highly accessible for memory, and they're held with high confidence. With weak attitudes, we see the opposite. So weak attitudes are relatively inconsequential, and they can be more easily changed. However, strong attitudes, whether toward a retail outlet or a product, spokesperson, website, ads, packaging, anything, right? Strong attitudes are difficult to change regardless of whether they are positive or negative. So it's no surprise that marketers strive to elicit strong, favorable attitudes toward their brands and limit strong negative ones. There are many attitude models, and they tend to fall into two basic categories. Single process models that deal with high involvement. So some decisions you're more involved with than others, right? And dual process models. And these deal with both high and low involvement. So they're called dual process models. We're going to look at one example of a single process model and two examples of dual process models. Fishbein and Eisen's theory of reasoned action is a single process model that is often applied in marketing, and it goes like this. The attitude a potential consumer has of a product will be the sum of their belief that the product has certain attributes times their evaluation or importance they assign to those attributes. So see the equation on the slide. Attitude equals sum, and then in parentheses we have belief that the product has certain attributes times evaluation. In other words, the evaluation or importance they assign to those attributes. Consider this example. Say a marketer wants to compare consumers' attitudes toward a brand of shoes called Clark shoes with their attitudes toward two other brands of shoes sold in the same mall. The shoes are rated on three different attributes. Note the overall rating, the ratings here for the Clark shoes, and note that the overall rating is 57. If this rating is higher than that when they measure and compare the other brands, consumers have developed more favorable attitudes toward Clark shoes. This is a very useful and simple model, and it works well to predict consumer behavior. In other words, which shoes that shoe shoppers will more likely choose. That is, it works really well when consumers are thinking rationally. But this also highlights the main limitation of this and other single process models. Humans do not always think rationally, right? Now, you read about many dual processing models in your book. In fact, it might have been a little intimidating. Okay, that's why I'm narrowing this down for you to one example of a single process model and two examples, the most prominent dual processing models. If you're wondering why there are so many different dual processing models, why researchers could not decide on and consolidate their theories under one, you are not alone. Suffice it to say that egos are involved, and more importantly, the models have different nuances and thus have focused on and inspired different kinds of research, all of which is of value. Now, if any of you go on to graduate school to become a social psychologist with a specialty and expertise in attitude research, you will learn about the different nuances of all the various processing models and their respective research. However, for purposes of this class, suffice it to say that I just want you to be aware that there are many dual processing models and that they all have their main tenet in common. And that tenet is they propose a more automatic, effortless way of thinking and a more effortful, careful way. So dual processing, right? That simplifies this. So instead of memorizing all of them in your book and their varying nomenclature of the two systems, I feel you will most benefit by studying and being responsible for the one single process model, Fishbein and Eisen's theory of reason action that we just presented, and the two most prominent dual processing models we are now going to look at in this next segment.